Picture a man born into everything: power, bloodline, armies that would die at his command, yet drowning in a life he never chose. Duke Cedric Blackthorne sits alone in chambers built by ancestors who believed duty mattered more than breath itself, and tonight he will ride into darkness not because he is brave, but because staying would destroy what remains of his soul. This is not a fairy tale about noble love conquering evil courts. This is about a man realizing too late that the cage was always unlocked, and the real prison was believing he had no choice. Stay with me. What comes next will show you exactly how far a desperate man will fall when the world he built on lies begins to crack. The great hall stank of perfume and decay. Cedric stood near the eastern wall, watching nobles drift between tables like carrion birds circling something dead. Silk gowns swept across marble floors that cost more than entire villages. Laughter echoed off vaulted ceilings where his grandfather's victories were painted in gold and blood. Every sound felt hollow. Every smile looked practiced. These people had spent decades perfecting the art of saying nothing while talking endlessly, and Cedric had learned to hate every single one of them. Lady Evelyn Ashford, his wife in name only, sat 3 tables away surrounded by the kind of women who measured worth in bloodlines and land deeds. She laughed at something Lord Pembroke said. The sound was brittle and sharp. Cedric knew that laugh. It was the one she used when she wanted someone to think she was happy. She had stopped trying to fool him years ago. A servant approached carrying wine in a crystal decanter that probably cost more than the man's annual wages. "Pour it," Cedric said. The servant's hand shook slightly. Red liquid filled the goblet. Cedric drank without tasting it. The wine was expensive because everything here was expensive. Quality and cost had stopped meaning anything to him around the same time he realized his marriage was a business transaction that would never mature into anything human. "Your Grace," a voice said from behind him, "the Chancellor wishes to speak with you about the northern grain contracts." Cedric didn't turn around. "Tell the Chancellor I'll review the contracts when I'm not watching vultures pretend to be civilized." There was a pause, the kind that meant someone was trying to figure out if they'd been insulted. Then footsteps retreated across the marble. He scanned the room again. Lord Victor Harrow stood near the center holding court with younger nobles who hung on his words like starving dogs. Victor was handsome in that calculated way some men achieve through careful grooming and expensive tailors. He smiled often. He touched people's shoulders when he spoke. He was also the most dangerous man in the kingdom, and everyone knew it except the idiots who thought charm and danger were mutually exclusive. Victor caught Cedric's eye across the hall. The smile widened. He raised his goblet in mock salute. Cedric looked away. The problem with court life was that everyone was always performing. Every gesture carried subtext. Every conversation was negotiation. People stopped being people and became game pieces moving across a board where the rules changed based on who held power that particular week. Cedric had been raised for this. Trained since childhood to read the room, play the politics, smile when necessary, and crush when required. He was exceptional at it. He also wanted to burn the whole thing down and walk away. But men like him didn't get to walk away. Duty was a chain welded around your throat the moment you inherited a title. Responsibility was the weight that crushed you slowly over decades until you became exactly like your father, bitter, cold, and convinced that suffering built character. "My lord," another servant approached. "Lady Evelyn requests your presence." Cedric set down the goblet. "Of course she does." He crossed the hall, aware that every eye tracked his movement. The Duke of Blackthorne didn't simply walk through a room, he occupied space. His presence demanded attention, whether he wanted it or not. It was exhausting. Evelyn watched him approach with eyes that held neither warmth nor hostility, just a kind of blank assessment. She had mastered the art of looking at him without actually seeing him. "Husband," she said. The word was technically accurate and emotionally meaningless. "Wife." Lord Pembroke was just telling the most amusing story about his hunting trip. "Perhaps you'd care to join us." Cedric glanced at Pembroke. The man had a weak chin and a weaker mind. He spent his father's money on hawks and hounds, while his estate managers did the actual work of running his lands. "I'm sure it's fascinating," Cedric said, "but I have business that requires attention." "At this hour?" Evelyn's eyebrow raised slightly. "How devoted you are to duty." The barb was subtle, but present. She knew he wasn't working. She knew he disappeared most nights. She had probably known for months. The question was whether she cared enough to do anything about it, or if his absence was actually a relief. Some responsibilities can't wait for convenient hours, Cedric said. Of course, Evelyn replied. Do give my regards to whatever responsibility keeps you so occupied after midnight. The women around her tittered softly. Pembroke looked confused. Cedric felt something cold settle in his chest. She was testing him, pushing to see if he'd react. This was how it worked at court. You didn't accuse directly, you implied, you suggested, you created doubt, and let other people's imaginations do the actual damage. I'll be sure to pass along your regards, Cedric said flatly. He turned and walked away before she could respond. Behind him, he heard Evelyn say something that triggered more laughter. He didn't care. Let them laugh. Let them gossip. It didn't matter what they thought as long as they didn't know the truth. The truth was hidden beyond the northern forest in a ruined monastery where no one had reason to look. The truth had dark hair and eyes that actually saw him instead of just his title. The truth was the only thing keeping him from putting a blade through his own throat. Cedric made his way through the castle's eastern wing toward the private stables. The halls grew quieter as he moved away from the great hall. Torches burned in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced against stone walls. This part of the castle was older. The stones here predated the current dynasty. They had witnessed centuries of secrets. He passed a corridor where two servants were whispering. They stopped when they saw him, bowed, waited until he was gone before resuming whatever gossip they'd been sharing. Everyone had secrets in the castle. Everyone was always watching everyone else. Privacy was an illusion, maintained only through careful paranoia. The stable master was waiting with Cedric's horse already saddled. The old man knew better than to ask questions. He'd been in Blackthorn's service for 40 years and understood that some things were better left unspoken. Storm's coming, the stable master said, looking at the sky. Might want to reconsider riding tonight, Your Grace. I'll take my chances. The old man nodded slowly. I'll have the saddle checked extra careful then. Wouldn't want anything coming loose in bad weather. It was the kind of careful statement that meant the stable master suspected something, but was loyal enough not to pry. Cedric appreciated that kind of discretion. It was rare. He mounted the horse and rode out through the eastern gate. Guards watched him pass but said nothing. The Duke could come and go as he pleased. No one questioned it. Yet, the road north cut through farmland first. Fields harvested bare for winter stretched toward distant tree lines. The sky overhead was heavy with clouds that promised the storm the stable master had predicted. Wind picked up as Cedric rode, carrying the smell of rain and earth. He pushed the horse faster. The monastery was 2 hours' hard ride from the castle if you knew the paths. Cedric had made this journey so many times he could probably do it blind. Through the farmland, into the forest, following game trails that wound between ancient oaks and pines. The trees grew denser as he rode deeper. The canopy blocked what little moonlight managed to break through the clouds. This was the dangerous part. Not because of bandits or wildlife, but because this was where rumors started. A duke riding alone into the forest after midnight would eventually attract attention. Cedric knew this. He'd known it from the beginning. But knowledge and action were different things. You could know something was dangerous and still do it because the alternative, not doing it, was worse. Rain started falling halfway through the forest. Light at first, then heavier. Within minutes, Cedric was soaked. The horse's hooves splashed through mud. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by thunder that rolled through the trees like God clearing his throat. He should turn back. Any reasonable man would turn back. Cedric kept riding. The monastery appeared through the rain like a ghost. Stone walls partially collapsed. The bell tower tilted at an angle that suggested the whole thing might come down in the next strong wind. Windows gaped empty. The place had been abandoned for decades after some plague or war or political shift made it irrelevant. Now it was just another ruin slowly being reclaimed by the forest, except for the light burning in the east wing. Cedric dismounted and tied the horse under an overhang that provided minimal shelter. He moved toward the entrance, trying not to think about how pathetic this was. A duke sneaking through rain to visit a woman he couldn't acknowledge publicly. A grown man hiding like some lovesick boy because court politics made genuine feeling a liability. The door opened before he reached it. He Rosalie stood backlit by candlelight wearing a simple dress that probably cost less than the buttons on his riding coat. Her hair was down. She looked at him with an expression that was part concern and part exasperation. "You're an idiot," she said. "Probably," Cedric replied. She stepped aside to let him in. He dripped water across the stone floor. The monastery's interior was in better condition than the exterior suggested. Rosalie had cleaned and organized the habitable sections. Candles provided light. A fire burned in the old hearth. It wasn't comfortable by any standard Cedric had been raised with, but it was warm and dry and honest in a way the castle had never been. "You're going to catch pneumonia riding through weather like this," Rosalie said, closing the door. "I've survived worse. That's not the point." She grabbed a blanket and threw it at him. He caught it and wrapped it around his shoulders. Water pooled at his feet. He probably looked ridiculous. He didn't care. Rosalie moved around the room lighting more candles. She had a way of moving that was completely unself-conscious. No performance, no calculation, just efficiency and grace that came from being comfortable in her own skin. Cedric envied that. He'd forgotten what it felt like to not constantly monitor his own behavior for political implications. "How was court?" she asked. "Tedious." "Evelyn? Sharp." Rosalie glanced at him. "She's getting suspicious. She's been suspicious for months. The question is whether she'll do anything about it. And if she does?" Cedric sat down near the fire. "Then things get complicated." Rosalie laughed. It was a short, harsh sound. "Things are already complicated, Cedric. We passed complicated 6 months ago. We're well into catastrophically stupid territory now." "You could leave," Cedric said quietly. "Where exactly would I go?" "I'm a commoner living in a ruined monastery because the Duke of Blackthorn can't stand his own life. If this gets discovered, they'll call me a whore and you a fool. I'll be lucky if exile is the worst that happens. I wouldn't let them hurt you. You might not have a choice." She sat down across from him. The firelight caught her face, highlighting the strong bones and direct eyes that had first attracted Cedric's attention months ago when she'd been working in a village market and he'd stopped to water his horse. They'd talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nothing significant, just conversation. But it had been real conversation without layers of subtext and political maneuvering, and Cedric had found himself thinking about it for days afterward. He'd gone back to the village the next week, and the week after. By the 3rd visit, they both knew what was happening. By the 5th visit, Cedric had suggested the monastery. Rosalie had looked at him like he was insane and then agreed anyway because apparently they were both committed to making terrible decisions. "I hate this," Cedric said. "I know. I hate what we're doing. I hate that I can't acknowledge you. I hate that I'm trapped in a marriage that benefits everyone except the 2 people actually in it. I hate that every time I leave here, I have to pretend you don't exist. Then stop pretending. You know I can't." Rosalie leaned forward. "What I know is that you're choosing not to. Those are different things, Cedric. You have power. You have influence. You could dissolve the marriage. You could face the political consequences. But you won't, because you're still playing by their rules. Breaking the marriage would destroy my family's alliances. It would create enemies. It could destabilize, so stabilize it some other way. You're brilliant when you want to be. Figure it out. It's not that simple." "It never is," Rosalie said. "But nothing changes if you keep choosing the comfortable misery over the difficult unknown." Cedric stared into the fire. She wasn't wrong. She was rarely wrong about this stuff. That was part of what made her dangerous. She saw through the rationalizations and justifications he'd been building for years. She asked questions that had no good answers. The rain hammered against the monastery walls. Wind howled through the broken sections. It sounded like the whole structure might collapse. "I should go," Cedric said without moving. "You just got here." "I know." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the monastery, water was leaking through the roof, creating a steady drip that echoed in the empty halls. "Tell me about the market," Cedric said eventually. "What happened this week?" Rosalie's expression softened slightly. She started talking about the village, about the baker's daughter getting married, about the blacksmith's apprentice breaking his arm, about crop yields and weather predictions and all the small human details that made up actual life outside castle walls. Cedric listened. This was what he came for as much as anything else. Not just Rosalie herself, but the window she provided into a world where people's concerns were immediate and genuine. where relationships mattered more than bloodlines, where you could actually trust that when someone smiled at you, it wasn't because they wanted something. A noise outside cut through the rain. Cedric's hand went to the knife at his belt. Rosalie stood up. They both froze, listening. Hoofbeats. Multiple horses approaching through the storm. Cedric moved to the window. Through the rain, he could see shapes moving between the trees. Torches burning despite the weather. Men on horseback. Too many to be coincidence. Too organized to be random travelers. "Get the lamp out," Cedric said. Rosalie moved fast, blowing out candles. The monastery went dark except for the fire. Cedric watched the shapes getting closer. 6 riders. Maybe 7. They were coming directly toward the monastery. "Did you tell anyone about this place?" Rosalie whispered. "No one." "Then how—" Cedric's mind raced. The stable master had noticed something, or guards had tracked his movements, or servants had talked. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that people were here and they were about to discover exactly what the Duke of Blackthorn had been hiding. The riders stopped outside. Cedric heard voices but couldn't make out words through the rain and stone walls. Then footsteps approaching the entrance. The door burst open. Lord Victor Harrow stood in the doorway, flanked by armed men. Water streamed off his riding cloak. His smile was sharp and triumphant. "Your Grace," Victor said, "what an unexpected pleasure finding you here. And with company, I see." He looked past Cedric toward where Rosalie stood, frozen near the dead fireplace. Victor's smile widened. How very interesting this is going to be. Victor Harrow stepped into the monastery like he owned it. Water dripped from his cloak onto stone floors that hadn't seen this many people in decades. His men filed in behind him, spreading out with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who knew how to control a space. They weren't guards. Guards followed orders without thinking. These men moved like hunters who enjoyed the work. Cedric kept his hand near the knife at his belt. The weapon was small and mostly decorative. Against 7 armed men, it was useless. But having his hand there made him feel slightly less helpless, and right now he'd take whatever psychological advantage he could manufacture. Victor looked around the monastery with exaggerated curiosity. His eyes lingered on the candles Rosalie had just blown out, the blankets arranged near the fire, the small table with 2 plates from an earlier meal, evidence of habitation, evidence of intimacy, evidence of everything Cedric had been trying to hide. "Quite the sanctuary you've built here," Victor said. "Remote location, no witnesses." "Very clever, Your Grace." "What do you want?" Cedric said flatly. Victor smiled. Such hostility. "I simply noticed our esteemed Duke had developed a habit of disappearing at unusual hours. Being a concerned friend and loyal subject, I felt obligated to ensure your safety. These forests can be dangerous at night." The words were polite. The subtext was a blade. Victor was telling Cedric that he'd been watched, tracked, that his secret hadn't been secret at all. How long had Victor known? Days? Weeks? The whole time? "You've ensured my safety," Cedric said. "You can leave now." "I don't think so." Victor moved closer to Rosalie. She didn't back away. Cedric felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Rosalie stood there, meeting Victor's gaze without flinching. She had more courage than most nobles Cedric knew. It was going to get her killed. "And who might you be?" Victor asked. "No one important," Rosalie said. "Oh, I doubt that. The Duke doesn't strike me as the type to risk everything for no one important. You must be quite special." "Leave her alone," Cedric said. Victor glanced back at him. "Or what? You'll defend her honor?" How noble, how utterly predictable. One of Victor's men laughed. The sound echoed in the empty monastery. Cedric calculated distances and odds. 7 men, 1 exit, Rosalie behind him. Even if he could somehow get past Victor and the others, where would they go? Into the forest during a storm? They'd be hunted down within hours. "Let's discuss reality," Victor said, turning to face Cedric directly. "You are the Duke of Blackthorn, married to Lady Evelyn Ashford. That marriage represents a political alliance worth more than most people earn in their entire lives. It keeps certain families aligned with the crown. It maintains stability. And you've been throwing all of that away to spend your nights in a ruin with a peasant girl. She's not a peasant," Victor finished. "Yes, I'm sure she's lovely and intelligent and everything you don't find at court. That's not the point. The point is that you've committed adultery against a noblewoman in a manner so reckless it borders on treason. Adultery isn't treason. No, but conspiring against the crown is. And with the right presentation, your little hideaway here could look very much like a conspiracy. Cedric felt the trap closing. Victor wasn't here by accident. This wasn't opportunistic discovery. This had been planned. The timing, the witnesses, everything designed to create maximum damage. "What do you want?" Cedric repeated. Victor walked back toward the door. His men stayed in position. Rain continued hammering the monastery. Thunder rolled across the sky like artillery fire. "I want what you have," Victor said simply. "Your lands, your titles, your position. I've wanted them for years. But you're frustratingly competent at the political games, and removing you required finding leverage. You've just handed me that leverage." "This isn't leverage," Cedric said. "It's gossip." "Is it? Let me paint you a picture. Tomorrow morning, word reaches the court that Duke Blackthorn has been hiding a woman in an abandoned monastery. Not just any woman, a commoner. The whispers start immediately. Why would a duke hide a mistress unless there was more to hide? What if the monastery isn't just a love nest? What if it's a meeting place? What if the duke is using his midnight rides to coordinate with enemies of the crown? That's insane, is it? You've been secretive, deceptive, disappearing at odd hours. How hard would it be to suggest you've been meeting with separatists from the northern provinces? Or foreign agents? I have men who could testify they saw suspicious visitors. Documents could surface suggesting financial irregularities. Your wife could be convinced to testify that your behavior has been erratic. Evelyn wouldn't. "Evelyn is humiliated," Victor interrupted. "You've ignored her for years, made her a joke at court. Don't underestimate what a wounded woman will do when given the chance to reclaim her dignity by destroying the man who stole it." Cedric's mind raced through options. Every path led to disaster. If he tried to fight this publicly, the scandal would consume everything. If he ran, he'd look guilty. If he stayed silent, Victor would control the narrative. "There's another option," Victor said quietly. Cedric waited. "You abdicate. Transfer your titles and lands to a regency council. I'll ensure you're treated fairly. You and your companion can leave the kingdom. Start over somewhere far from court politics. No scandal, no treason charges, just a quiet exit. And you take everything. I take what should have been mine years ago, yes." Rosalie spoke for the first time since Victor's arrival. "You planned this from the beginning." Victor looked at her. "Not from the beginning. But once I noticed the Duke's pattern, yes, I planned how to use it. That's how survival works at court. You identify weaknesses and exploit them before someone else does." "You're a parasite," Rosalie said. "I'm a realist. The Duke chose passion over pragmatism. That's admirable in poetry. In politics, it's suicide. I'm simply the one holding the blade." Cedric moved without thinking, 3 steps forward, hand reaching for the knife. Victor's men reacted faster. 2 of them grabbed Cedric before his fingers touched the hilt. They slammed him against the monastery wall, hard enough that his vision blurred. Pain exploded across his shoulders. "Don't," Victor said calmly. "Violence won't help you here." Cedric struggled against the men holding him. They were stronger than they looked. Or he was weaker than he wanted to believe. Years of court politics hadn't prepared him for physical confrontation. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be actually powerless. "Let him go," Rosalie said. Victor ignored her. He walked over to where Cedric was pinned, got close enough that Cedric could smell wine on his breath. "You had everything," Victor said quietly. "Title, wealth, respect. You could have played the game properly, kept your mistress hidden better, maintained appearances. But you got sloppy. You started believing you deserved happiness more than you deserved power. That's the mistake weak men make." "I'm not weak," Cedric said through clenched teeth. "You're weak enough to risk everything for her. That's weakness. Love is weakness. Caring about anything more than you care about survival is weakness." Victor stepped back and nodded. His men released Cedric. He slumped against the wall, fighting the urge to vomit. His shoulders throbbed where they'd hit stone. "You have until dawn," Victor said. "Abdicate and disappear, or I'll destroy you publicly in ways you haven't imagined yet. Your choice." He turned toward the door. His men followed. Within moments, the monastery was empty except for Cedric and Rosalie and the sound of rain. Cedric slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From rage so pure it felt like his blood was boiling. He'd been outmaneuvered, trapped, reduced to choosing between bad options because he'd been stupid enough to think he could have something real in a world built on lies. Rosalie knelt beside him. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Liar." She touched his shoulder gently. He winced. She pulled her hand back. "We need to leave," she said. "Right now, before he comes back with more men." "And go where?" Cedric asked. "He knows who you are now. He probably has men watching every road out of here. We'd be caught before we reached the border. Then we fight." "With what?" "I'm one man. He has resources I can't match. You have resources too. Allies. People who what? Who'll risk their own positions to defend a duke caught in adultery. Politics doesn't work that way. The moment Victor spreads this story, everyone will distance themselves to avoid contamination. That's how court functions. Loyalty lasts exactly as long as association remains beneficial." Rosalie stood up. "Then we go to the king. Explain everything. Victor can't accuse you of treason without proof. He doesn't need proof. He needs suspicion. Once enough people start questioning my loyalty, proof becomes irrelevant. I'll be removed from positions of influence just to be safe. That's exactly what Victor wants. So you're giving up." The accusation stung worse than the physical pain. Cedric looked up at Rosalie. She stared down at him with an expression that mixed disappointment and anger and something else he couldn't identify. "I'm being realistic," Cedric said. "No, you're being a coward." The word hit like a slap. Cedric felt something crack inside his chest, not his heart, something deeper. The foundation he'd built his entire identity on. The belief that he was strong, capable, in control. "You think I want this?" Cedric said. "You think I want to choose between losing everything I've built and losing you? I think you're so terrified of losing what you have that you won't risk it even when what you have is killing you. That's not fair." "None of this is fair. That's the point. You've spent your whole life playing by rules designed to keep men like Victor in power. Now he's using those same rules against you, and you're still acting like there's a proper way to handle this." Cedric pushed himself up off the floor. His legs felt unsteady. "What do you want me to do? Storm the castle? Challenge Victor to single combat? This isn't a story where love conquers all. This is reality. In reality, powerful men destroy anyone who threatens them, and everyone else looks the other way." Rosalie moved close to him, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes. She put her hand on his chest right over where his heart was trying to beat its way through his ribs. "Then make a different reality," she said. "That's not how the world works. It is if enough people decide it is. Victor has power because people gave it to him. They can take it away. You don't understand how deeply the system—" "I understand perfectly. The system protects people like Victor because people like you won't break it. You're so invested in maintaining order that you'd rather sacrifice yourself than risk chaos. But sometimes chaos is the only way forward." Cedric wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the reasons why she was wrong. But standing there with her hand on his chest and rain hammering the monastery walls, he couldn't find the words. Because maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe he had been choosing comfortable misery over difficult freedom. Maybe survival and living weren't the same thing. "If I fight Victor, people will die," Cedric said quietly. "People are already dying. They die in your villages because court politics siphons resources. They die in wars started over honor and territory. The only difference is whether you die with them or watch from safety. I'm trying to protect you. Stop protecting me and start trusting me. I didn't ask for safety. I asked for truth." Thunder cracked overhead loud enough to shake the monastery. The storm was getting worse. Cedric looked at Rosalie and saw in her face something he'd forgotten existed. Certainty. Not the arrogant certainty of nobles who thought breeding made them superior. Real certainty born from knowing exactly who you were and refusing to apologize for it. "If we do this," Cedric said slowly, "it gets worse before it gets better. Victor won't back down. He'll use everything he threatened and more. Your name will be destroyed. You'll be called things that— I've been called things my entire life. Rich people have been looking down at me since I was born. I don't care what they think. The court is a collection of terrified people clinging to power they don't deserve. Stop acting like their opinions matter. They control nothing they don't control because people like you let them. You want to know the real difference between us? I stopped believing their lies years ago. You're still hoping they'll accept you if you just follow the rules perfectly enough. The words landed like punches, each one true, each one cutting through the justifications Cedric had been building since adolescence. He'd spent decades convincing himself that the system worked, that duty mattered, that sacrifice built character. But standing in a ruined monastery with the only person who'd ever really seen him, all those beliefs felt hollow. "What are you suggesting?" Cedric asked. "That you stop running, stop hiding, stand in front of the court and tell them the truth. All of it. The marriage was political. You found something real. Victor is using it as a weapon because he wants your power. Make them choose sides. They'll choose his side. Maybe. Or maybe some of them are tired of men like Victor. Maybe some of them want an excuse to fight back. You won't know until you try." Cedric walked to the window. Outside, the storm raged. Trees bent in the wind. Lightning turned the sky white. This was the moment. The point where every decision led somewhere irreversible. If he agreed to Rosalie's plan, there was no going back. If he abdicated like Victor demanded, he'd lose everything that made him who he was. Either way, the man he'd been was dying tonight. "I need to know you understand what you're asking," Cedric said without turning around. "If we do this, they'll tear you apart. Say you seduced me. Call you a schemer who manipulated a duke for personal gain. Your life will become a nightmare. My life is already a nightmare. I'm hiding in ruins because loving you is illegal. At least this way I'm visible. Visibility isn't safety. I don't want safety. I want freedom. Even if it kills me, I want to choose my own death." Cedric turned to face her. She stood there backlit by dying firelight, looking small and fierce and absolutely certain. He thought about his father, about the lessons drilled into him since childhood, about duty and responsibility and all the chains disguised as honor. His father would have chosen abdication, chosen survival over principle, chosen to live empty rather than die trying to be whole. His father had been miserable until the day he died. "Tomorrow," Cedric said, "I ride back to the castle. I call an assembly of the court, and I tell them everything." Rosalie nodded. "What about Victor?" "Victor gets what he wants, a confrontation, but not on his terms. You'll need allies. I'll need witnesses I can trust, people who will confirm the truth instead of whatever version Victor creates." "How do you find those?" "I don't know yet, but I have until dawn to figure it out." The monastery fell quiet except for the storm. Cedric moved back toward the fire. His mind was already racing through possibilities. The stable master knew about his nightly rides. Could he be convinced to testify? The servants who'd seen Victor talking with certain nobles. The financial records that might show unusual payments. It wasn't much. But it was something. Rosalie sat down beside him. "You're sure about this?" "No, but I'm done pretending the alternative is acceptable." She took his hand. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed gently. They sat like that for a long time. The fire burned low. Rain continued falling. Outside, the kingdom slept, unaware that tomorrow everything would change. Men like Victor thought they controlled the world through fear and manipulation. They thought power came from holding secrets and destroying enemies. But Cedric was learning that real power came from being willing to lose everything, from standing in front of people who wanted you destroyed and refusing to apologize for being human. Victor had given him a choice between survival and authenticity. He'd assumed Cedric would choose survival because that's what nobles always chose. Victor had underestimated what happens when a desperate man stops caring about consequences. The night passed slowly. Cedric and Rosalie didn't sleep. They talked through options, planned contingencies, identified who at court might be sympathetic versus who would immediately align with Victor. It was brutal strategic thinking stripped of illusions. The kind of clarity that only came when you'd already decided to burn your life down and were just figuring out how to aim the flames. Around 3 a.m, Rosalie asked the question Cedric had been avoiding. "What happens to us after?" Cedric stared into the dying fire. "I don't know. Best case, some nobles support us and we survive with diminished power. Worst case, we're exiled or imprisoned. Middle case, I lose everything but you stay safe. That's not the middle case I want. It's the one I'm fighting for. I'm not something to be protected, Cedric. I'm someone who chose this knowing the risks. Stop trying to save me and let me help save us." He looked at her, really looked. Not at the idealized version he'd built in his mind. At the actual woman, stubborn, brave, clear-eyed about exactly how bad things could get. She wasn't naive. She'd just decided that some things were worth risking death for, and loving someone honestly was one of them. "You're terrifying," Cedric said. "Good. You need someone terrifying. Your whole life has been surrounded by people who told you what you wanted to hear. I'm going to tell you what you need to know, even when it hurts. Promise?" "Promise." They talked until the sky started turning gray. Dawn approached like a deadline. Soon Cedric would have to ride back, face the court, turn possibility into action. Every minute that passed made it more real, more irreversible. Finally, as the first light touched the horizon, Cedric stood. Rosalie stood with him. "I need you to stay here," Cedric said. "No." "Rosalie, I'm coming with you. If you're going to stand in front of the court and tell the truth, I'm going to be there. This is my life too. I don't hide while you fight. It's dangerous. Everything is dangerous. Stop trying to control what I risk." Cedric wanted to argue, wanted to insist she stay where it was safer. But looking at her face, he knew it was useless. She'd made her choice the same way he'd made his. They were both committed to seeing this through, regardless of where it led. "Fine," he said. "We ride together." They gathered what little they had. Rosalie put out the fire. Cedric checked his weapons, the knife at his belt and a sword he rarely used. Against trained soldiers, they were nearly useless. But carrying them made him feel slightly more prepared for violence he knew was coming. Outside, the storm had passed. The forest was quiet except for dripping water and bird calls. Cedric's horse was where he'd left it. He mounted and pulled Rosalie up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist. They rode through this forest as dawn broke. Light filtered through trees still heavy with rain. The world looked washed clean, deceptively peaceful. By tonight, that peace would be shattered. The ride back to the castle took 2 hours. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. They'd committed to a path that led to confrontation. Everything else was just details. As the castle came into view, Cedric felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, certainty. He'd spent his entire life being the person others needed him to be, playing roles, wearing masks, following rules designed to keep him controlled. Now he was done performing. Whatever happened next, it would be real, authentic, his. They rode through the eastern gate. Guards stared but didn't stop them. A duke could bring whoever he wanted into his own castle. By noon, that fact would become a weapon. But right now, in this moment, Cedric rode through his own lands with the woman he loved, and nobody could legally stop him. He took Rosalie to his private chambers. Servants gaped. Whispers started immediately. Good. Let them talk. The secret was ending today anyway. In his room, Cedric changed into formal court attire, the heavy clothes he wore when representing his title. Rosalie watched from near the window. "You look like a duke," she said. "I am a duke. That's the problem." "No, the problem is you let being a duke become your entire identity. Today you get to be a person who happens to be a duke. That's different." Cedric adjusted his coat, checked his appearance in the mirror. The man looking back was familiar but somehow changed. Same face, same title, different eyes, the eyes of someone who'd stopped running. A knock at the door interrupted them. "Enter," Cedric called. The stable master stepped in. He looked nervous. "Your Grace, there are men asking about last night. Lord Victor's men. They're telling stories." "Let them," Cedric said. "Assemble the court. Full formal gathering. Tell them the Duke of Blackthorn demands an immediate audience." The stable master hesitated. "Your Grace, if I might—" "You might not. Just deliver the message." The old man bowed and left. Cedric turned to Rosalie. "Last chance to stay hidden," he said. "Stop offering me chances I won't take." They walked through the castle together. Servants scattered. Nobles stared. Word was already spreading. The Duke had brought a woman into his private chambers. The same woman he'd been hiding in the forest. The scandal Victor had threatened was already beginning. The great hall was packed. Nobles who'd arrived early to position themselves for maximum social advantage now found themselves witnessing something unprecedented. A duke walking openly with his mistress. Cedric felt hundreds of eyes tracking his movement, judgment forming before he'd said a word. Victor stood near the center. His smile was sharp and satisfied. He thought he'd won. Thought Cedric was about to abdicate publicly and hand over everything. He hadn't considered that desperate men sometimes chose destruction over surrender. Cedric took his position at the front of the hall. Rosalie stood beside him. The message was clear. He wasn't hiding her anymore. Wasn't pretending. The masks were off. Lord Victor has made accusations, Cedric said. His voice carried across the hall. Before he spreads more lies, I'm going to tell you the truth. The hall went silent. Even the servants stopped moving. I have been unfaithful to my wife. I have been meeting in secret with this woman, Rosalie Vale. Not because I'm plotting treason, not because I'm conspiring with enemies, but because my marriage was never real. It was a political arrangement that benefited everyone except the two people forced into it. I tried to live with that emptiness. I failed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, disapproval. Some faces showed sympathy, most showed judgment. Lord Victor believes this gives him leverage to take my lands and titles. He's probably right. According to law and tradition, adultery is grounds for removal. But before you grant him what he wants, understand what you're actually approving. Cedric locked eyes with Victor. The smile had faded slightly. You're approving a system where loveless political marriages are mandatory and genuine feeling is punished. You're approving men like Victor using personal pain as weapons. You're approving a world where power matters more than humanity. If that's the kingdom you want, then remove me. Give him everything. But know that you're choosing fear over truth. The silence in the hall was absolute. Cedric had just committed political suicide, confessed to crimes that justified his removal, put everything on the table and dared them to take it. Victor stepped forward. A touching speech, Your Grace. But laws exist for reasons. You broke them. The consequences are clear. Then let's discuss consequences, Cedric said. While I was hiding a relationship, what were you hiding? Financial irregularities in your estate? Questionable alliances with northern separatists? Or maybe we should examine how you knew exactly where to find me last night. How long have you been having me followed? How many others have you been tracking? Victor's expression hardened. You're deflecting. I'm exposing. You want my position because you think you're entitled to it. But entitled men rarely build anything worth having. They just take what others created and call it ambition. The crowd shifted. Some nobles looked uncertain. They'd seen Victor's methods before, watched him destroy others who stood in his way. Maybe they were tired of it. Maybe they were terrified of being next. Either way, doubt had entered the room. Lady Evelyn stepped forward. Cedric hadn't seen her arrive. She looked composed, cold, exactly what a betrayed wife should look like. My husband confesses adultery in front of the entire court, Evelyn said. He humiliates me publicly. And yet I find myself asking a question. Why? She looked at Cedric, not with hatred, with something closer to exhaustion. Why now? Why confess instead of hiding better? Unless you finally realize that survival without living is just slow death. The hall erupted, nobles shouting questions, guards moving to restore order, Victor demanding Cedric's immediate arrest. And through it all, Cedric stood with Rosalie beside him, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Free. Whatever happened next, he'd told the truth, stopped performing, chosen authenticity even knowing it might destroy him. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. Time would tell which. The great hall erupted into chaos, but Cedric barely heard it. His entire body felt suspended in that strange moment after a blade cuts skin, but before the pain registers. He'd just confessed to crimes that could cost him everything, and the only thing he felt was relief. That terrified him more than the shouting nobles, or Victor's calculating stare, or even the possibility of execution. A man who felt relief at his own destruction was already halfway dead. Guards moved forward, but stopped when Lord Chancellor Pemberton raised his hand. The old man's face was unreadable. He'd served 3 generations of Blackthorns and probably knew more secrets than anyone in the kingdom. His support could save Cedric. His condemnation would finish what Victor started. "Order!" Pemberton called out. His voice cut through the noise like a judge's gavel. "We will have order, or I will clear this hall." The shouting reduced to angry murmurs. Nobles adjusted their positions literally and politically. Cedric watched them calculate which side offered better survival odds. Court politics moved faster than thought. People who'd smiled at him yesterday now looked through him like he was already gone. Lady Evelyn still stood near the center. Her expression hadn't changed. That bothered Cedric more than if she'd been screaming. Evelyn angry, he could handle. Evelyn, cold and analytical, meant she was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Victor stepped forward again. His composure had returned. The momentary doubt Cedric's accusations created was already fading. Victor was too skilled to let emotion derail his strategy. The Duke confesses adultery and attempts to deflect with baseless accusations against me, Victor said. This is desperation, nothing more. I move for immediate arrest and formal inquiry into his fitness to hold title. Several nobles voiced agreement. Cedric felt the room turning. His gamble was failing. Truth without proof was just noise, and Victor had spent years building alliances that Cedric's confession couldn't break in one morning. Before we discuss arrest, Evelyn said quietly, perhaps we should discuss why Lord Victor was so conveniently positioned to discover my husband's affair. Victor turned to her. I've explained that. Concern for the Duke's safety led you to have him followed for weeks, Evelyn interrupted. Led you to track his movements with the thoroughness of someone planning an ambush rather than a rescue. Why such intense interest in my husband's activities, Lord Victor? What were you hoping to find? The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spread. Nobles who'd been nodding along with Victor suddenly looked uncertain. Evelyn had just done something dangerous. She'd defended the man who publicly humiliated her. That made no tactical sense unless she had information no one else possessed. Victor's smile thinned. Lady Evelyn, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset, Evelyn said. I'm curious. You've positioned yourself as a concerned nobleman protecting the kingdom from a reckless duke, but your concern seems remarkably self-serving, almost as if you needed a scandal to justify taking what you wanted. Cedric stared at his wife. They hadn't spoken privately in months, hadn't been anything resembling allies in years. Yet here she was, defending him in front of the entire court. Either she'd lost her mind or she knew something Cedric didn't. Victor's composure cracked slightly. With respect, Lady Evelyn, your marriage problems don't excuse your husband's crimes. No, but they provide context. Evelyn moved through the crowd like a blade cutting silk. You want to know why Cedric confessed? Why he chose public humiliation over quiet abdication? Because abdication was never the real option. You were always going to destroy him regardless. The only question was whether he'd die silent or fighting. She stopped directly in front of Victor, close enough that he had to look down at her, close enough that everyone could see she wasn't afraid. You made a mistake, Evelyn said. You assumed I'd help you destroy my husband out of wounded pride. You sent intermediaries suggesting I testify against him, promised me protection and status if I cooperated. You thought a humiliated wife would jump at revenge. The hall went silent. This was new information, game-changing information. Victor's face remained neutral, but Cedric saw the calculation behind his eyes. Evelyn had just revealed Victor's hand before he wanted it played. You're inventing stories, Victor said. Am I? Then you won't mind if we examine your correspondence. The letters sent through back channels. The promises made to various nobles in exchange for supporting Cedric's removal. Should we air all of that publicly, or would you prefer to withdraw your accusations? Victor's jaw tightened. This was the moment. The point where he either backed down or escalated. Men like Victor never backed down. Your husband is a confessed adulterer, Victor said coldly. Whatever political maneuvering you're attempting doesn't change that fact. He broke sacred vows. He deserves removal. Sacred vows, Evelyn repeated. How interesting that you invoke sanctity. Tell me, were the vows sacred when the marriage was arranged? When two people were forced together for political convenience? Or do vows only become sacred when breaking them serves your purpose? She turned to address the entire hall. Her voice carried authority Cedric had never heard from her before. My husband and I have a marriage of political necessity. We both knew that from the beginning. He sought comfort elsewhere. Yes, that violates law and tradition, but let's be honest about what those laws protect. They don't protect love or fidelity. They protect power structures. They ensure noble families can trade children like livestock to maintain alliances. Several nobles shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn had just said what everyone knew, but no one acknowledged. Court marriages were business transactions. Pretending otherwise was just propaganda to make the system seem noble instead of transactional. I won't defend what Cedric did, Evelyn continued, but I won't condemn him for being human in a system designed to make us all monsters. If you remove him for seeking genuine connection, you set a precedent that destroys every noble who's ever looked for something real outside their arranged marriage. How many of you want that precedent? The question hung in the air. Cedric looked around and saw recognition on dozens of faces. Nobles with their own secrets, their own forbidden relationships, their own reasons to fear a standard that punished humanity. Victor saw it too. His strategy was collapsing. Evelyn had turned his weapon against him by making the issue bigger than one duke's affair. She'd made it about the entire system. This is manipulation, Victor said. She's protecting her position by telling the truth? Evelyn smiled. How terrible for you. The Lord Chancellor stepped forward. His ancient face was thoughtful. Lady Evelyn raises valid concerns. Before we proceed with removal, perhaps we should examine the broader context. Lord Victor, you've been quite aggressive in pursuing the Duke's position, almost as if you had foreknowledge of vulnerability to exploit. I served the kingdom by exposing... By stalking a duke and manufacturing a crisis, the Chancellor interrupted. That's not service. That's opportunism. Victor's composure finally broke. His face flushed. Are you all insane? The man confessed. He stood in front of you and admitted crimes worthy of execution, and you're debating context. Yes, a voice called from the crowd. We are. Lord Marcus Aldridge stepped forward. He was younger than most senior nobles, progressive in ways that made traditionalists nervous. Cedric had always liked him, but they'd never been close allies. The Duke confessed to being human, Marcus said, to wanting something real in a world of performance. If that's a crime worth execution, half this court should be dead. Including you, Victor. Don't think we don't know about your arrangements in the southern estates. Victor went very still. Whatever Marcus was referencing, it hit hard. Other nobles were nodding. Whispers spread. Apparently Victor's secrets weren't as secure as he'd thought. The momentum in the room shifted. What had felt like Cedric's execution was becoming something else. An examination of power structures. A questioning of traditions everyone accepted but no one actually believed in. Evelyn had cracked the foundation and now others were hammering at the cracks. Cedric caught Evelyn's eye. She looked back at him with an expression he couldn't read. Not forgiveness, not affection, something colder and more pragmatic. She'd saved him, but not out of love. This was strategy, her own play for something Cedric couldn't yet identify. Victor rallied. His voice hardened. Regardless of broader questions, the law is clear. Duke Blackthorn violated his marriage contract. That contract was witnessed and sealed. Breaking it has consequences. Then let's discuss those consequences, the Lord Chancellor said. Traditionally, adultery is grounds for annulment and loss of certain privileges, not execution, not complete removal from title unless other crimes exist. Lord Victor, do you have evidence of other crimes? Victor hesitated. Just long enough to be noticeable. I have reasons to suspect. Suspicion isn't evidence, the Chancellor said. Produce proof or withdraw your accusations. The proof exists, Victor said. The monastery wasn't just a meeting place for adultery. It was a location for coordination with... He stopped. The hall waited. Victor's face showed the calculation of a man realizing he'd walked into a trap. With whom? Evelyn asked sweetly. Please enlighten us. Who exactly was my husband coordinating with in a ruined monastery 2 hours north of here? Foreign agents? Rebels? Be specific. Victor's silence was damning. He'd threatened evidence but couldn't produce it because it didn't exist. He'd been bluffing, banking on Cedric capitulating before anyone called the bluff. Cedric felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't victory. This was postponement. Victor would regroup, find new attacks. The man was too dangerous and too committed to simply walk away. This confrontation had just raised the stakes. I move for formal inquiry, the Chancellor said, into both the Duke's conduct and Lord Victor's activities. We will examine all claims, all evidence, all accusations. Until that inquiry concludes, Duke Blackthorn retains his titles and position. Lord Victor, you will cooperate fully or face charges of conspiracy. Victor's face was stone. He'd lost this round, but Cedric could see him already calculating the next move. Men like Victor didn't give up. They adapted. The hall began to clear, nobles dispersing to gossip and strategize. Cedric stood motionless as people filed past. Some avoided eye contact. Others nodded subtle acknowledgement. The political landscape had shifted, but where it would settle remained unclear. Rosalie touched his arm. "We should go." "Wait," Evelyn said. She approached them both. Her expression was carefully neutral. Cedric tensed. This was the moment. Whatever Evelyn wanted, it would cost him. "Walk with me," Evelyn said. "Both of you." It wasn't a request. Cedric exchanged glances with Rosalie. They followed Evelyn out of the hall through a side corridor into a small private chamber used for confidential meetings. Once inside, Evelyn closed the door and turned to face them. "Don't mistake what just happened for forgiveness," Evelyn said. "I didn't save you out of sentiment." "Why did you save me?" Cedric asked. "Because Victor is a threat to everyone, and you were the only one stupid enough to oppose him openly. If he'd succeeded in destroying you, I would have been next. Then Marcus. Then anyone else who might challenge his accumulation of power. You became useful by becoming vulnerable." The words were brutal in their honesty. Cedric appreciated that more than false kindness. "What do you want?" he asked. "Annulment," Evelyn said. "Clean, quiet, no scandal attached to my name. You can have your commoner. I get independence. We both walk away from this disaster with something. That's it?" "That's it. I don't want revenge. I want freedom. This marriage has been a cage for both of us. Let's end it." Cedric looked at Rosalie. She was watching Evelyn with careful attention, reading her the way she read everyone, looking for deception or hidden angles. "She's telling the truth," Rosalie said quietly. "She wants out as much as you do." Evelyn smiled slightly. "You're perceptive. I like that. Cedric, you chose better than I expected." "Don't," Cedric said. "Don't pretend we're friends now. We're not friends. We're survivors of the same disaster. There's a difference." The door opened without warning. Victor stood in the doorway flanked by armed men. Not guards, mercenaries. The kind of men who followed orders without questioning morality. "Touching scene," Victor said. "The wronged wife, the guilty husband, the peasant mistress." "Very dramatic." Cedric moved in front of Rosalie. "Get out." "I don't think so. You see, the inquiry the Chancellor called for is problematic for me. It might reveal things I'd rather keep hidden. So I've decided to accelerate my timeline." "What are you doing?" Evelyn demanded. "Taking what should have been mine years ago. You all made this more difficult than necessary, forcing me to be creative." He gestured. The mercenaries moved into the room. One grabbed Evelyn before she could react. Another grabbed Rosalie. Cedric lunged, but someone hit him from behind. Pain exploded across his skull. He went down hard, vision blurred. Victor crouched beside him. "I gave you a choice," he said quietly. "Abdicate or be destroyed. You chose neither. That was a mistake." Cedric tried to focus, tried to think through the pain. "What's the play? You kill us? That makes you look guilty." "I don't kill you," Victor said. "You kill yourself. Overcome with guilt over your crimes, you take poison. Your mistress dies with you, Romeo and Juliet. Very tragic. Lady Evelyn discovers the bodies and confirms your instability. I console the court and accept regency until a proper investigation determines succession." "That's insane," Evelyn said. "No one will believe." "Everyone will believe it," Victor interrupted, "because I've spent years building credibility while Cedric destroyed his. Dead men can't defend themselves. The narrative belongs to whoever speaks first." He stood up, pulled out a small vial. Inside, liquid that looked like water but probably wasn't. "You're going to drink this," Victor said, "both of you, or I'll have my men cut Lady Evelyn's throat while you watch. Your choice." Cedric's mind raced. He was unarmed, outnumbered, concussed. Every advantage belonged to Victor. Even if he could somehow overpower the men holding Rosalie and Evelyn, where would they go? Victor had planned this carefully, probably had more men blocking exits. This wasn't improvisation. This was execution. "You won't get away with this," Cedric said. It was weak, the kind of thing desperate men said when they had no real options. "I already have," Victor replied. "The moment you confessed publicly, you made yourself vulnerable. I'm just finishing what you started." He uncorked the vial. The smell was bitter, probably fast-acting, designed to look like natural poison someone might use for suicide. Cedric had read about such things in reports about political assassinations. Never thought he'd smell it himself. Rosalie was watching him. Her eyes said things her mouth couldn't. She was terrified, but also defiant, ready to fight even knowing it was hopeless. That look almost broke something in Cedric's chest. "I'll drink it," Cedric said. "Let them go. You get what you want. My death, the scandal, everything. Just let them live." "Noble," Victor said. "But no. The mistress dies with you. That's how the story works. Star-crossed lovers. Forbidden romance, tragic ending. The court will eat it up." "You bastard," Evelyn said. She was struggling against the man holding her, getting nowhere. Victor walked over to Cedric, held out the vial. "Last chance to do this with dignity. Drink willingly, or my men force it down your throat. Either way, you die. But one way is cleaner." Cedric looked at the vial, at Victor's face, at Rosalie held by men who didn't care whether she lived or died. This was the endpoint. The consequence of every choice that led here. Choosing love over duty, truth over deception, authenticity over survival. He'd thought standing up to the system mattered, thought exposure and honesty would create change. But systems didn't change because one man told the truth. They changed when enough people decided the cost of maintaining them was higher than the cost of tearing them down. Cedric had been one man. That wasn't enough. A crash echoed from somewhere in the castle. Shouting, running footsteps. Victor's head snapped toward the sound. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "What is that?" he demanded. One of his mercenaries went to check. Before he reached the door, it burst open. Lord Chancellor Pemberton stood there, flanked by actual castle guards. Behind them, Cedric could see more guards flooding the corridor. "Lord Victor," the Chancellor said. "Step away from the Duke." Victor's face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise. Calculation. Rage. He still held the vial. His mercenaries still held Evelyn and Rosalie. This could go very wrong, very fast. "This is a private matter," Victor said. "No," the Chancellor replied. "This is attempted murder. We've been watching you for weeks, Victor, tracking your movements, your alliances, your payments to certain questionable individuals. Did you think you were the only one capable of surveillance?" Cedric felt something unlock in his chest. Not relief yet, but hope. The Chancellor had been playing a deeper game than anyone realized. "Release them," the Chancellor ordered. "Now." Victor calculated odds. 20 guards against 5 mercenaries. Math wasn't complicated. He nodded. His men released Evelyn and Rosalie. Both women moved away quickly, but Victor didn't drop the vial. He held it up where everyone could see. "You think you've won?" he asked. "You think exposing me changes anything? The system is corrupt. Power belongs to whoever's willing to take it. I'm just honest about that." "You're honest about nothing," the Chancellor said. "You're a parasite who mistakes cruelty for strength." "At least I'm not weak," Victor said. "At least I don't pretend honor matters." He looked at Cedric. His smile was sharp and broken. "You want to know the real joke? I didn't need to do any of this. You were destroying yourself just fine. The loveless marriage, the secret affair, the guilt eating you alive. You would have imploded eventually. I just got impatient." "Then that's your failure," Cedric said. "Not mine." Victor laughed. It sounded unhinged. "No, your failure is thinking any of this matters. That standing here confessing and playing noble changes the fundamental truth. Men like me always win because we're willing to do what men like you won't. You want to believe goodness triumphs. It doesn't. Ruthlessness does." He brought the vial to his lips. "Wait," the Chancellor said. But Victor was already drinking. He swallowed the entire contents, threw the empty vial at Cedric's feet. It shattered. "There's your evidence," Victor said. His voice was already thick, tongue swelling. The poison worked fast. "Can't testify if I'm dead, can't be questioned. My secrets die with me." His legs gave out. He collapsed. The mercenaries didn't move to help him. They were professionals. Their employer was dying, contract terminated. Victor's body convulsed. Guards moved forward, but there was nothing to do. Poison this potent didn't have antidotes. Within seconds, he was still. The Chancellor knelt beside the body, checked for pulse, shook his head. "Gone," he said quietly. Cedric stared at Victor's corpse. The man who'd tried to destroy him was dead. Victory through suicide. It felt hollow, wrong. Victor had been right about one thing. His death protected his secrets. Whatever conspiracy he'd built died with him. Evelyn moved to Cedric's side. "Are you hurt?" "I've been better," Rosalie pushed through the guards and grabbed Cedric's face. Her hands were shaking. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever offer to sacrifice yourself for me. I know what you thought. Stop thinking I need saving and start thinking we're in this together. The Chancellor stood. Guards were already moving to secure the mercenaries and process the scene. Political cleanup was beginning. Stories would be crafted, narratives shaped. Victor's attempted murder would become something explainable, digestible. The court would move on because that's what courts did. Duke Blackthorn, the Chancellor said, "You should rest. We'll need your testimony, but that can wait until you've recovered." "What happens now?" Cedric asked. "Now we sort through the mess Victor created, identify his co-conspirators, trace his funding, determine how deep the corruption runs. It will take months, possibly years, but it will be done. And my confession?" The Chancellor smiled slightly. "Your confession was brave, also politically disastrous, but given Victor's actions, I believe the court will view your adultery with more understanding. Circumstances matter. Intent matters. You're not the villain Victor tried to paint you as, so I keep my title? For now. The inquiry will proceed, but I suspect the outcome will be annulment rather than execution. Lady Evelyn has already indicated she supports dissolution of the marriage. That simplifies matters considerably." Cedric looked at Evelyn. She nodded. Her expression was unreadable as always, but something in her eyes looked almost peaceful. "I never wanted to be your enemy," Evelyn said. "I just wanted to be free. Now we both get that chance." "What will you do?" Cedric asked. "Leave court. Travel. Maybe find whatever you found with her." She gestured toward Rosalie. "Just somewhere else. With someone who chooses me instead of being forced to marry me. You deserve that. We both do." Guards escorted them out of the chamber. The corridor was crowded with nobles who'd heard the commotion. They stared as Cedric passed. He didn't care anymore. Let them stare. Let them gossip. He'd survived attempted murder. Court judgment felt trivial by comparison. In his chambers, Rosalie cleaned the cut on his head where he'd been struck. Her hands were gentle, but her face was furious. "You were going to drink it," she said. "The poison. You were actually going to do it, to save you." "I didn't ask to be saved. I asked to be trusted. There's a difference." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be better. Stop treating me like something fragile that needs protecting. I chose this life knowing the risks. Honor that choice instead of trying to undo it." Cedric caught her hands, held them. She was right. He'd spent so long being the protector that he'd forgotten how to be a partner. Old habits from a lifetime of responsibility. He was going to have to unlearn all of it. "How do I do that?" he asked. "How do I stop trying to save everyone?" "You start by believing I can save myself, that we save each other. You're not alone in this anymore. Stop acting like you are." She kissed him, hard, like she was trying to prove a point. Maybe she was. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I thought I was going to watch you die," she said quietly. "Don't make me feel that again." "I'll try." "Don't try. Do." The next days blurred together, investigations, testimonies, documents reviewed and witnesses questioned. Victor's network unraveled slowly. Names emerged. Nobles who'd supported him quietly, merchants who'd funded his schemes, even a few foreign contacts suggesting Victor's ambitions extended beyond simple power grabs. Cedric cooperated with everything, answered questions, provided context. The court began seeing him differently, not as a reckless duke who risked everything for love, as someone who'd opposed corruption and nearly died for it. Narrative mattered. The story being told shaped reality more than actual events. 3 weeks after Victor's death, the Lord Chancellor called Cedric to his private office. The old man looked tired. This investigation had aged him. "Sit," the Chancellor said. Cedric sat. The office was lined with books and maps, evidence of decades spent managing kingdom politics. "The inquiry has concluded," the Chancellor said. "Regarding your confession of adultery, the court has decided that given the circumstances, political marriage, Victor's manipulation, evidence of systemic corruption, punitive measures are unwarranted. Your marriage to Lady Evelyn will be annulled. You retain your title and lands. There will be no further action." Cedric let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "And Rosalie?" "Miss Vale is free to go wherever she chooses, including remaining with you. should you both desire that. The court won't interfere. Thank you. Don't thank me. Thank Lady Evelyn. Her testimony regarding the nature of your marriage proved crucial. She could have destroyed you. She chose not to. Why? The Chancellor smiled. Because she understood something most don't. Revenge destroys the person seeking it more than the target. She chose freedom over vengeance. Wise woman. What about Victor's allies? Being dealt with quietly. Some will be removed, others will be watched. The cancer Victor represented is being cut out, but these things take time. We're trying to avoid civil war while cleaning house. And the broader issues, the political marriages, the system, the Chancellor leaned back. That's harder. Systems change slowly. What you did, confessing publicly, forcing uncomfortable conversations, planted seeds. Whether they grow depends on whether others are brave enough to water them. Change comes from many people making hard choices, not one hero fixing everything. Cedric nodded. He'd known that intellectually. Living it was different. What will you do now? The Chancellor asked. Honestly, I don't know. I've spent my entire life being the Duke of Blackthorn, following rules, meeting expectations. I don't know who I am without that structure. Then you have work to do, figuring that out. Becoming whoever you actually want to be instead of whoever you were raised to be. That's harder than fighting conspiracies. The old man stood. Cedric stood as well. One more thing, the Chancellor said. Victor was wrong about something. He said ruthlessness always wins. But ruthless men die badly. You survived by being honest. Remember that. Cedric left the office feeling untethered. He'd won, kept his title, avoided execution, got the woman he loved and freedom from a loveless marriage. Everything he'd gambled for. So why did it feel incomplete? He found Rosalie at the garden. She was sitting on a stone bench watching birds. The late afternoon sun caught her hair. It's over, Cedric said. We're free. Rosalie looked at him. Her expression was complicated. Are we? The court. I'm not talking about the court. I'm talking about you. You fought for freedom, but you're still wearing every chain you were born into. The title. The responsibilities. The belief that you have to be what everyone else needs instead of who you are. I don't know how to stop being the Duke. Then learn. Because I didn't risk my life to be with the Duke of Blackthorn. I risked it to be with Cedric. The man who laughs at stupid jokes and thinks too much and hates court politics. If that man is buried so deep under duty that he can't surface, then we've already lost. The words hit harder than any of Victor's threats. Cedric sat down beside her. The garden smelled like roses and earth, peaceful, deceptive. Nothing had been truly peaceful since this began. How do I do that? He asked. Separate the man from the title? You start small. Stop asking permission to live your life. Stop performing for people who don't matter. Start making choices based on what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. And if what I want conflicts with duty, then you decide which one wins. You can't serve both masters forever. Eventually, you have to choose. Cedric looked at the castle, at walls that had housed generations of Blackthorns, men who'd prioritized duty over everything, who'd died bitter and alone convinced they'd done the right thing. He didn't want to become them, but breaking that pattern meant risking everything his family had built. What if I choose wrong? He asked. You already chose wrong for years. Staying in a loveless marriage, hiding what mattered. At least now you're choosing consciously. That's progress. She took his hand, her fingers interlaced with his. I'm not asking you to abandon responsibility, Rosalie said. I'm asking you to redefine it. To build something better instead of maintaining something broken. That monastery you rebuilt for me? Do that for the whole system. Take what's ruined and make it serve people instead of traditions. Cedric squeezed her hand. The idea was terrifying, revolutionary, exactly the kind of thing that got people executed. But sitting there in the garden with the only person who'd ever really understood him, it also felt possible. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Neither do I. But I know you can try. And trying is how things change. They sat in silence as evening approached. Guards changed shifts. Servants moved through the castle preparing dinner. Life continued because life always continued regardless of personal apocalypses. Cedric thought about Victor's final words. that ruthlessness always won, that the system rewarded cruelty over kindness. Maybe that had been true. Maybe it still was. But systems were built by people. If enough people decided to build differently, the old structure would collapse. One person couldn't change everything, but one person could start. Could demonstrate that alternatives existed. Could prove that honor wasn't weakness and honesty wasn't suicide. Victor had tried to destroy him by exposing his humanity. Instead, that exposure had revealed how many others were equally trapped. The confession that should have ended Cedric had cracked the foundation of a system many wanted to escape, but none dared challenge first. That was power. Not the kind that came from fear and manipulation, the kind that came from being vulnerable enough to give others permission to be vulnerable too. "I'll do it," Cedric said. "Rebuild the system. Make it serve people. I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." Rosalie smiled. "That's the man I chose." She leaned against him. They watched darkness fall over the kingdom. Somewhere in the castle, nobles were scheming, planning, calculating their next moves. The game never stopped. Power never rested. But for the first time in his life, Cedric wasn't playing their game. He was starting to imagine a different one, where winning meant building instead of destroying, where strength came from connection instead of isolation, where duty served life instead of killing it. It would take years. Decades, maybe. He'd face opposition from people who benefited from the current system. He'd make mistakes, fail repeatedly. But failure while trying was better than success at maintaining something rotten. The real question was whether he had the courage to keep choosing evolution over stagnation. To keep believing change was possible, even when evidence suggested otherwise. To become someone entirely different from every Blackthorn who came before. Rosalie's breathing had slowed. She'd fallen asleep against his shoulder. Cedric sat motionless, not wanting to wake her. Above them, stars emerged. The same stars his ancestors had watched while building an empire on blood and calculation. Maybe it was time to build something better. Not an empire. Something smaller, but more honest. A life lived deliberately instead of by default. A legacy measured in freedom instead of territory. Victor had forced Cedric to the edge of a cliff and demanded he jump. Instead, Cedric had learned to fly. Not high, not gracefully, but enough to survive the fall and land somewhere new. Now he just had to figure out what to build in this unknown territory. Who to become when all the old definitions no longer fit. How to be a duke who served people instead of traditions. A man who loved openly instead of hiding. A human being instead of a political construct. The work would be brutal. Revolutionary work always was. But sitting there with Rosalie sleeping against him and the kingdom spread out below, Cedric felt something he hadn't felt in years. Ready. The peace lasted exactly 3 days. Cedric was in the eastern courtyard reviewing reports when the first messenger arrived. A young rider covered in mud and sweat, who stumbled off his horse and collapsed at the guard's feet. They carried him inside. By the time Cedric reached him, the boy was barely conscious. "My lord," the messenger gasped. "The northern estates, they're burning." Cedric felt ice settle in his stomach. What happened? Victor's men. The ones who escaped. They've rallied supporters, mercenaries, bandits, anyone angry enough to fight. They're destroying everything. Villages, farms. They're killing people who supported you. How many men? 50. Maybe more. They hit 3 villages before dawn, set fires, murdered anyone who resisted. They're moving south toward the monastery. The monastery. Where this had all started. Where Cedric had hidden the one thing that mattered more than politics or power or bloodlines. Victor was dead, but his poison was still working. His allies had become a cancer that wouldn't die with their leader. Rosalie appeared beside him. Her face was pale. "They're going after the monastery." "Not the building," Cedric said quietly. "You. They're going after you." The realization hit like a blade. Victor's remaining followers knew the monastery was symbolic. Destroying it sent a message. Killing Rosalie sent an even clearer one. That loving the wrong person carried consequences that survived even death. "We need to mobilize guards," Evelyn said. She'd been standing near the doorway. "Send soldiers north immediately." "That takes time," Cedric said. "Time we don't have. By the time guards reach the villages, these men will have moved on. They're not trying to hold territory. They're trying to inflict maximum damage before disappearing. Then what do you suggest? Evelyn asked. Cedric looked at the messenger. How long ago did they hit the last village? 2 hours. Maybe 3. They're moving fast, hitting targets and vanishing. That's guerrilla tactics. They've got someone leading them who knows what they're doing. One of Victor's military contacts, the Lord Chancellor said. He'd arrived during the conversation. Victor had relationships with several disgraced commanders, men with skills but no morality. Can we track them? Rosalie asked. Not fast enough, Cedric said. Not through forest terrain. They know the land. They've planned escape routes. Traditional pursuit won't work. The room fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing, that this was the consequence of Cedric's choices, that standing up to Victor had triggered retribution that was now consuming innocent people. That honor had a body count. There's another option, Cedric said slowly. We don't chase them. We draw them to us. How? The Chancellor asked. We give them what they want. The monastery. Rosalie. Me. We make ourselves bait. Absolutely not, Rosalie said. It's the only way to stop this quickly. They want revenge. They want to finish what Victor started. So we let them think they can. That's suicide, Evelyn said flatly. It's strategy. We choose the ground, choose the timing, turn their hunt into our ambush. The Chancellor studied Cedric's face. You're serious. Completely. We take a small force. Fast riders. Get to the monastery before they do. Fortify it. When they arrive expecting an easy target, we're ready. And if they bring more men than you can handle, then I die making sure Rosalie doesn't. But either way, this ends. The room erupted. Multiple voices arguing simultaneously. Too dangerous, too reckless, too many variables. Cedric let them argue. He'd already made his decision. This was happening regardless of approval. Rosalie grabbed his arm, pulled him aside. Her grip was iron. We're not doing this, she said. Yes, we are. I didn't survive Victor to watch you throw your life away on a suicide mission. It's not suicide, it's taking control. Right now they're hunting us, choosing when and where to strike. This way we choose. By painting a target on ourselves. The target's already there. Has been since I confessed. Since you stood beside me. These men won't stop until we're dead, or they are. I'm choosing the battlefield. Rosalie's eyes were furious. You promised to stop trying to save me alone. I'm not. I'm asking you to trust that I can do this. That we can do this together. By riding into a trap? By setting one. There's a difference. She stared at him, searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe. Fear. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. If we do this, we do it smart, she said. No hero nonsense, no sacrificing yourself. We survive together or not at all. Agreed. Liar. But I'm coming anyway. Cedric turned back to the others. They'd stopped arguing, were watching him with expressions ranging from concern to resignation. I'm riding north, Cedric said, with or without support. Anyone who wants to help, be ready in an hour. The Lord Chancellor sighed. How many men do you need? 20. Fast riders, good fighters. People who understand this isn't official business. You're asking for volunteers to join an unsanctioned military action. I'm asking for people who understand that sometimes doing the right thing means ignoring proper procedure. The Chancellor looked old in the morning light, tired, but also something else. Resolved. I'll find your men, he said. But Cedric, if this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, I can't protect you. This is outside my authority. You'll be alone. I've been alone before. Not like this. This is war. Small war, but war nonetheless. If you kill Victor's men, his remaining allies will demand justice. Blood for blood. You could trigger civil conflict. Then I'll handle that when it comes. Right now, people are dying because I challenged corruption. I'm not letting more innocents burn while I hide behind politics. The Chancellor nodded slowly. 1 hour. I'll have your men. He left. Evelyn lingered. She watched Cedric with an expression he couldn't decipher. You've changed, she said. I had to. No, you chose to. There's a difference. The man I married would have calculated odds and chosen safety. You're choosing danger, because safety costs more than danger. People are dying, Evelyn. People are always dying. That never bothered you before. It should have. That's the point. I spent years prioritizing stability over humanity. Now people I'm responsible for are being murdered, and I'm supposed to what? Send official requests for military intervention while villages burn? Evelyn stepped closer. I'm not criticizing. I'm observing. You're becoming someone different, someone who might actually deserve the title instead of just inheriting it. Don't canonize me. I'm terrified. I have no idea if this plan will work. But you're doing it anyway. That's the difference between the duke you were and the man you're becoming. She turned to leave, stopped at the door. Don't die, she said. I'd hate to have wasted my testimony saving a corpse. Then she was gone. Rosalie was gathering supplies. Practical things. Bandages, water, weapons. She moved with efficiency that spoke to a life spent preparing for emergencies. Cedric watched her and felt something twist in his chest. This woman had walked into his disaster willingly and never complained, never asked him to be less than he was. She deserved better than a fight for survival in a ruined monastery. What are you thinking? Rosalie asked without looking up. That I'm sorry. For what? Everything. Pulling you into court politics, making you a target, dragging you toward probable death. She looked at him then. Her eyes were clear, unapologetic. I pulled myself into this. Stop apologizing for respecting my choices. You just want me safe. I know. But safe isn't the same as alive. I'd rather die standing beside you than live hiding from you. The words should have comforted him. Instead, they made everything worse, because they meant if this failed, he'd lose the only person who'd ever really mattered. That thought was more terrifying than any physical danger. The men assembled in the courtyard an hour later. 20 fighters. Some were guards. Others were soldiers who'd served under Cedric's father. A few were just young men looking for purpose who'd heard about the Duke who'd challenged corruption. They looked ready. Cedric hoped they understood what ready actually meant. The Lord Chancellor addressed them briefly, explained the situation. The northern attacks, the threat to civilians. This wasn't official military action. Anyone who rode north did so voluntarily. No one would be punished for refusing. Not one man backed down. They rode hard, north through farmland that showed increasing signs of destruction. Burned cottages, trampled fields, bodies left in ditches like discarded trash. The attacks were recent, hours old. Cedric felt rage building with every corpse they passed. This was the cost of his choices. People who'd supported him now paid with their lives. We can't stop, one of the soldiers said. His name was Marcus. Young, maybe 20. If we stop for the dead, we won't save the living. Keep riding, Cedric ordered. They pushed the horses to the edge of endurance, covered ground that normally took 3 hours in under 2. The monastery appeared through the trees like a skeleton. The eastern wing Rosalie had restored looked tiny against the massive ruined sections. Cedric dismounted. His legs were unsteady. 2 hours hard riding after days of minimal sleep. His body was running on fear and determination. That wouldn't last. Marcus, take 5 men and scout the perimeter. Check for any signs they've already been here. Marcus nodded and vanished into the trees with his men. The rest of you, inside. We need to fortify every entrance, block windows, create choke points. If they attack, we want them funneling through spaces we control. The men move fast. They'd fought before. Knew how to turn a building into a defensible position. Cedric watched them work and tried not to think about how inadequate 20 men were against 50 trained killers. Rosalie touched his shoulder. You're thinking we're outnumbered. We are. Numbers aren't everything. We have position, preparation, motivation. They have rage and nothing to lose. So do we. She was right. Victor's men were fighting for revenge. But Cedric's men were fighting for survival. That changed calculations, made people dangerous in ways strategy didn't account for. Marcus returned an hour later. His face was grim. They're coming, maybe 2 hours out. I counted at least 40 men, could be more in the forest. 40. Twice Cedric's force. The math was brutal. Even with defensive advantage, those odds meant casualties. Meant some of the men standing here would die in the next few hours. Cedric gathered everyone in the monastery's main hall, 20 faces watching him, waiting for orders, for inspiration, for something that would make facing death easier. You all know what we're up against, Cedric said. You know the odds. I'm not going to lie and say this will be easy. It won't be. Some of us won't see tomorrow. But if we run now, these men will keep killing, keep destroying. They'll burn every village that supported me, murder every person who stood against Victor's corruption. So we're making a stand here. We're telling them that some things are worth dying for." He paused. "Let that sink in. Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. No judgment, no consequences. This isn't your fight. You owe me nothing." No one moved. "Then let's make sure their victory costs everything they have." The next 2 hours were preparation. They barricaded the main entrance, created murder holes in walls, positioned men at strategic points, everything they could do with limited resources and time. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But it was something. Cedric found Rosalie in the room where they'd first spent nights together. She was checking a crossbow. Her hands were steady. No trembling. She'd accepted what was coming. "When this starts, stay behind the lines," Cedric said. "No." "Rosalie, I can shoot." "You know I can. We need every bow we have. Not if it gets you killed." She looked at him. That look that said arguing was useless. "We agreed," she said. "Together or not at all. That means fighting together. You're not a soldier. Neither are you. You're a duke who learned to swing a sword at parties. But you're here. So am I." She was right. Again. Cedric hated how often she was right. "Fine," he said. "But you stay with Marcus. He's the best fighter we have. He'll keep you alive. If he's the best fighter, shouldn't he be where the fighting's heaviest?" Cedric didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the truth was he needed Marcus protecting Rosalie more than he needed Marcus winning the fight. That was selfish. Tactical stupidity. Exactly the kind of emotional decision that got people killed. But he was making it anyway. The sun began setting. Long shadows stretched across the monastery grounds. In the failing light, everything looked haunted. Like the ghosts of monks who died here were watching, judging, maybe laughing at the living for thinking they could control death through preparation. "They're here," someone called from the watch position. Cedric moved to the window, looked out. Men emerged from the tree line like demons. 40, at least. Maybe more. They carried torches, weapons, the kind of tools people brought when they wanted to destroy rather than conquer. At the front of the group was a man Cedric recognized, Lord Harwick, one of Victor's closest allies, a military commander stripped of rank years ago for excessive brutality. He'd disappeared after Victor's death. Apparently he'd been organizing this. Harwick stopped 50 yards from the monastery, raised his hand. His men halted. "Duke Blackthorn," Harwick shouted, his voice carried across the distance. "I know you're in there. You and your whore. Come out. Face justice." "Justice," Cedric muttered. "That's what he's calling this." He moved to the entrance, opened a gap in the barricade and stepped out, alone. Behind him, he heard Rosalie curse, heard Marcus move to follow. He waved them back. "Harwick," Cedric called. "You're trespassing." Harwick laughed. "You killed my friend, my commander. You stand there in your stolen title and talk about trespassing. Victor tried to murder me. He died by his own hand. Because you forced him to it. Because you destroyed everything he built. He built corruption. I exposed it. You destroyed order, stability. You think confessing your sins makes you noble? You're a traitor to your class, to everything nobility represents." Cedric walked forward, stopped 20 yards from Harwick's position, close enough to see the man's face. The hatred there was pure, undiluted. This wasn't about justice. This was about rage. "Then I'm a traitor," Cedric said. "If nobility means sacrificing people for power, I don't want it. Noble words from a man hiding in ruins with peasants. Better than hiding behind corruption with cowards." Harwick's hand moved to his sword. "You can still walk away from this. Surrender the woman. Accept punishment. We'll let your men live." The lie was obvious, transparent. Harwick was going to kill everyone regardless of surrender, but he needed Cedric to believe otherwise, needed him afraid. "No," Cedric said simply. "Then you doom everyone inside with you. They chose to be here, just like your men chose to follow you. Only difference is mine are fighting for something real. Yours are fighting for a dead man's revenge. Victor was worth 10 of you. Then why did he die alone? Why did he drink poison rather than face justice? Because he knew what he was. A parasite. And parasites die when they lose their host." Harwick drew his sword. The blade caught torchlight. Behind him, 40 men did the same. The sound of steel clearing scabbards was like thunder. "Kill them all!" Harwick ordered. The attack came as a wave, men rushing forward with weapons raised, screaming, creating noise meant to terrify and disorient. It worked. Cedric's heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed to run. He stood his ground. Behind him, the monastery's defenses activated. Arrows flew from murder holes. Men stationed at windows fired crossbows. The first wave of attackers fell. Not all of them, not even most, but enough to slow the charge. Cedric ran back toward the barricade, dove through the gap. Hands pulled him inside. Someone slammed the barrier shut. Outside, men were pounding against the doors, trying to force entry. "Hold the line," Cedric shouted. The monastery became chaos. Attackers throwing torches through windows, fire catching on old wood, smoke filling the halls, men fighting in doorways where numbers meant less than position. The sound was deafening, steel on steel, screaming, bodies hitting stone. Cedric fought beside his men. His sword felt awkward. He'd trained with weapons but never used them for real violence. Training assumed rules. This had none. Men came at him trying to kill. No honor, no technique, just brutal efficiency. He killed his first man within minutes, a mercenary who broke through a window. Cedric's blade caught him in the throat. Blood sprayed. The man's eyes went wide. Shocked, like he hadn't expected to actually die. He collapsed, gurgling. Cedric stared at the corpse. He just killed someone, ended a life. The enormity of it hit him like a physical blow. This was what violence actually meant, not abstract strategy or political maneuvering, blood and death and permanent endings. Another attacker came through the window. Cedric moved on instinct, blocked, countered. His blade found flesh. The second man fell. Then a third. Training took over. Muscle memory from years of practice. His mind retreated somewhere distant while his body did what it had been taught. This was survival. The most basic human drive. Kill or be killed. Everything else was just philosophy. The eastern hall collapsed. Fire had weakened the structure. Burning timbers crashed down. 2 of Cedric's men were caught underneath. Their screaming lasted seconds. Then silence. "Fall back," Marcus yelled. "Regroup in the main hall." They retreated, fighting withdrawal. Every step backward meant yielding ground, but holding positions that were collapsing meant dying for nothing. Sometimes retreat was the only intelligent option. The main hall became their final defensive position, 20 men reduced to 15. Harwick's force had lost maybe 10. Still overwhelming numbers, still inevitable math. Cedric's shoulder burned where someone had cut him, not deep but bleeding. His hands were slick with blood, some his, mostly others. He'd lost count of how many men he'd killed. Stopped trying to remember their faces. Rosalie was beside Marcus. Blood on her hands, too. She'd killed. He could see it in her eyes. That same shocked recognition he'd felt. That understanding that violence was permanent and irreversible and left stains nothing could wash clean. "They're regrouping," someone said. "Getting ready for the final push." "How many do we have left?" Cedric asked. Marcus counted quickly. 15. Maybe 16. Jackson's hurt bad. Might not last. And them? 30. Could be more. Enough. Enough to win. That was the calculation. Numbers, strategy, cold tactical reality. They'd hurt Harwick's force, but not enough. The end was coming. "We could surrender," one of the younger soldiers said. His name was Thomas, barely 18. "Try to negotiate." "They'll kill us anyway," Marcus said. "Harwick didn't come here to negotiate." "Then we die fighting," another soldier said. The room fell silent. Everyone understanding this was it, the last moment before the final push. Some men prayed, others checked weapons. A few just sat staring at nothing. Cedric looked at Rosalie. She met his eyes. No fear there, just acceptance. They'd chosen this path knowing where it led. Now they were walking it to the end. "I'm sorry," Cedric said. "Stop apologizing. We're still alive. That means we still have choices." "What choice?" "We're trapped. Outnumbered. Out of options." "We're alive," Rosalie repeated. "That's the only option that matters." She was right. Again. Always. Even facing death, she saw what Cedric missed. That surrender wasn't the only alternative to victory. that sometimes survival meant changing the game entirely. The doors exploded inward. Harwick's men flooded through. The final assault, no strategy now, just overwhelming force. They came like a tide, unstoppable, drowning everything. Cedric's men met them at the center of the hall. Steel crashed. Men died. The fighting was brutal, desperate. Both sides knowing this decided everything. Cedric fought beside Marcus, back to back, protecting each other. The training hall exercises he'd hated as a young man were saving his life now. Block, parry, counter, mechanical movements. Don't think, just react. A blade got through his defense, cut across his ribs. Pain exploded. He stumbled. A man rushed him. Marcus intercepted, killed the attacker, pulled Cedric upright. "Stay up," Marcus shouted. "You fall. We all fall." Cedric fought through the pain, through exhaustion, through the screaming certainty that he was about to die. Every breath hurt. Every movement sent fire through his body. He kept fighting anyway because stopping meant dying, and he wasn't ready to die yet. Then he saw Harwick. The man was cutting through Cedric's defenders like they were children. Professional, efficient, brutal. He'd killed 3 men in as many seconds, was moving toward Rosalie. Cedric pushed forward, got between them. Their blades met. The impact sent shockwaves up Cedric's arm. Harwick was stronger, faster, better trained. Every advantage belonged to him. "You should have surrendered," Harwick said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "This didn't have to happen." "Yes, it did," Cedric replied. "Men like Victor always create this. You're just finishing his work." Victor was a visionary. Victor was a parasite. You're the infection he left behind. Harwick attacked, fast, precise. Cedric barely blocked, backed up. Harwick came again. Blade moving in patterns Cedric couldn't track. He blocked on instinct, missed one. The sword opened his shoulder, blood poured. Cedric was losing, dying. He could feel it, his body failing. Too many wounds, too much blood lost. He was running on empty and Harwick was just getting started. Behind them, the fight continued, men dying, the monastery burning, everything collapsing into chaos. This was the end, the point where all choices led, where consequences arrived and demanded payment. Harwick raised his blade for the killing blow. Cedric was too slow to block, too weak to dodge. This was it, the final moment. Everything reducing to one instant where life became death. Then Rosalie was there, between them. Crossbow raised. She fired. The bolt took Harwick in the chest. He stumbled backward, looked down at the bolt protruding from his ribs, looked up at Rosalie with something like surprise. "You," he said, then collapsed. The hall went silent. Both sides stopped fighting, staring at Harwick's body. The leader was dead. The man who'd held them together through rage and revenge was gone. What remained was just men, tired, bloody, no longer sure what they were fighting for. "Your commander is dead," Marcus shouted. "Surrender or join him." For a moment, nothing happened. The mercenaries looked at each other, calculating. Then one dropped his weapon. Then another. Within seconds, the fight was over. Harwick's men surrendering or fleeing. The battle won through one arrow and the sudden absence of certainty. Cedric collapsed. His legs gave out. Rosalie caught him, lowered him to the ground. Her face was pale, hands shaking. She'd just killed a man, saved Cedric's life, changed everything with one shot. "Stay with me," she said. Her voice was breaking. "Don't you dare die now." "Not planning to," Cedric managed, but his vision was darkening, blood loss, shock, his body shutting down from damage. He could feel consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers. Marcus was there, applying pressure to wounds, shouting orders, organizing the survivors, taking command because Cedric couldn't. The last thing Cedric saw before darkness took him was Rosalie's face, tears cutting tracks through blood and soot. She was saying something. He couldn't hear it. The world was fading, sound disappearing. Everything reducing to a single point of light that kept shrinking until finally it was just darkness and silence and nothing at all. Pain arrived before consciousness. A dull throbbing that spread from Cedric's ribs through his entire body like fire crawling under skin. He tried to move and regretted it immediately. Every muscle screamed protest. His shoulder felt like someone had driven hot iron through the joint. He opened his eyes. Sunlight filtered through damaged walls. The monastery. Still standing, Barely. Smoke stains covered everything. The smell of burned wood and old blood hung in the air thick enough to taste. "You're awake," a voice said. Cedric turned his head slowly. Rosalie sat beside him on the stone floor. Her face was pale. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. Blood still stained her hands and clothes. She looked like she'd aged a decade overnight. "How long?" Cedric asked. His voice came out as gravel. 2 days. "You lost a lot of blood. We weren't sure you'd wake up." Cedric tried to sit, made it halfway before his body quit. Rosalie pushed him back down gently but firmly. "Don't," she said. "You're not healed. Moving will reopen the wounds. The others?" 11 survived. 4 died during the fight. 2 more died after. Injuries too severe. We buried them yesterday. 11 out of 20, nearly half his force gone. Men who'd volunteered to follow him into this nightmare. Now they were corpses in unmarked graves because Cedric had asked them to defend something most people couldn't even understand. Harwick's men scattered. The ones who didn't surrender ran. Marcus thinks they'll regroup, but without leadership they're just bandits now. Dangerous, but not organized. And Harwick? Dead. "You saw that," Cedric remembered. The crossbow bolt. Harwick's surprise, the way certainty had drained from his eyes as he realized he was dying. "You killed him." "I saved you," Rosalie corrected. "There's a difference. Not much of one." She looked at him. Her eyes were hard in ways they'd never been before. Something had broken in her during the fight. Some illusion about what violence actually meant. Cedric recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors after his first real battle years ago. The moment when you understood that killing changed you permanently and no amount of justification made you clean again. "I don't regret it," Rosalie said. "He was going to kill you. I'd do it again. That doesn't make it easier." "No. But it makes it necessary. I'm learning the difference." Cedric reached for her hand. She let him take it. Her fingers were cold despite the warm air. They sat like that in silence. 2 people who'd crossed lines they could never uncross. Who'd learned that survival sometimes required becoming the kind of person you'd sworn never to be. The Lord Chancellor arrived midday. He looked haggard. The investigation into Victor's network combined with managing the aftermath of the monastery battle had apparently consumed him. He studied the ruined hall with an expression that mixed disgust and resignation. "You're alive," the Chancellor said to Cedric. "That's unexpected." "Disappointed?" Cedric asked. "Relieved. If you died, this would have become a martyr situation, much harder to manage politically. Always thinking about politics. Someone has to. Your romantic stand nearly triggered civil war." "Nearly isn't actually," Cedric said. The Chancellor sat down on a piece of broken stone. He moved like an old man. Maybe he was. Cedric had never thought about the Chancellor's age before, had never considered that managing a corrupt kingdom might be slowly killing him. "Harwick is dead," the Chancellor said. "His remaining forces have scattered. We've arrested several dozen of Victor's known associates. The network is broken. It will take years to fully dismantle, but the immediate threat is over. What about the villages, the people they killed, being cared for, families compensated? It's not enough. Money never is. But it's what we have." And the court's response? Mixed. Some nobles are calling you a hero, others a reckless vigilante. Most are just relieved the violence has stopped. They don't particularly care how. "What do you call me?" Cedric asked. The Chancellor smiled tiredly. "I call you a man who forced change through catastrophe. Whether that makes you a hero or a disaster depends on what happens next." Meaning? Meaning you've destroyed the old system, exposed its corruption, proven that standing up to it doesn't automatically mean death. But you haven't built anything to replace it. Destruction is easy. Creation is hard. The question is whether you're capable of the second part. Cedric thought about that. The Chancellor was right. He'd spent months tearing down, challenging, fighting, but he had no clear vision for what came after, just vague ideas about systems serving people instead of power. That wasn't a plan. That was philosophy. Philosophy didn't feed villages or protect borders or resolve disputes. "I don't know how to build what you're describing," Cedric admitted. "Then learn. You have time now. Use it." "How much time?" The Chancellor stood. His knees cracked audibly. "As much as you need. The court has agreed to a reconstruction period. You'll retain your titles and lands. In exchange, you'll help design new governance structures. Make the changes you fought for into actual policy. That's a lot of trust. It's not trust. It's pragmatism. You're popular with commoners now, the man who fought corruption and survived. If we try to remove you, we risk uprising. Better to co-opt your momentum than fight it. Cedric appreciated the honesty. The Chancellor never pretended nobility was about anything other than power management. It was refreshing in its cynicism. "What about Rosalie?" Cedric asked. The Chancellor glanced at her. She'd been standing near the window listening. Her expression was unreadable. "Miss Vale is free to go wherever she chooses. The court recognizes that attempting to control her would be both pointless and politically unwise. She's become a symbol. Symbols are dangerous to suppress." "A symbol of what?" Rosalie asked. "Of choosing authenticity over convenience," the Chancellor said. "Of refusing to hide. Half the court secretly envies you for that. The other half fears you for the same reason. I didn't ask to be a symbol. No one ever does. But symbols aren't chosen. They're created by circumstance and recognized by people desperate for something to believe in. You're that now, for better or worse." The Chancellor left shortly after, promised to return in a week to begin the reconstruction planning. Cedric watched him go and felt the weight of what had been promised settling on his shoulders. Rebuilding wasn't just about policy, it was about fundamentally reimagining how power worked. That was generational work. He'd be dead before seeing it finished. But maybe that was the point. Maybe real change was always something you started knowing you'd never see the end. You planted seeds others would harvest, built foundations others would finish, trusted that the work mattered even when you couldn't witness its completion. Over the following weeks, people came to the monastery. Survivors from the villages, families of men who'd died in the fighting, nobles curious about the duke who'd nearly died defending commoners. Each one wanted something: justice, answers, hope. Cedric tried to give what he could. It was never enough. A woman arrived carrying a child. Her husband had died in one of Harwick's raids, burned alive defending their home. She looked at Cedric with eyes that held no forgiveness. "He died because you challenged Victor," she said, "because you couldn't just accept your arranged marriage like every other noble." "I'm sorry," Cedric said. It was inadequate, meaningless. But it was all he had. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't feed my children. No, it doesn't. She stared at him, waiting for more, for explanation or justification or some reason why her suffering mattered. Cedric had none. Her husband was dead because Cedric had made choices that created ripples, consequences he couldn't control or prevent. That was the truth. It was brutal and unfair and irreversible. "I can't give you back what you lost," Cedric said, "but I can make sure the system that created this dies with Victor, that the corruption that made men like him possible gets burned out completely. Your husband's death will mean something. I promise you that." "Promises from nobles," the woman said, "worth less than the breath wasted speaking them. Then judge me by actions. Come back in a year. See what's changed. If nothing has, you can call me a liar to my face and I'll accept it." She left without responding. Cedric watched her go and felt something crack inside his chest. This was the cost. Not the physical wounds that would heal, the guilt that wouldn't. Every death in this conflict carried his fingerprints. Every widow and orphan was partially his responsibility. That weight would never lift. Rosalie found him that evening standing at the edge of the monastery grounds. The sun was setting, painting the forest in red and gold. It looked peaceful, deceptive. This forest had seen so much violence, so many secrets. It would take decades before the land forgot. "You're thinking about the woman," Rosalie said, "among others. You can't save everyone. Doesn't mean I shouldn't try. No, but it means accepting that trying isn't the same as succeeding. You'll fail people, disappoint them, make promises you can't keep. That's part of leadership. The part they don't teach." Cedric looked at her. "When did you become an expert on leadership?" "When I stopped being the person hiding and became the person standing beside you. You see things differently from that position. You understand that every choice has costs, that sometimes you choose between bad and worse, that surviving means living with consequences you can't undo." She moved closer, stood beside him looking at the sunset. "I killed a man," she said quietly. "I think about it constantly. Wonder if there was another way, some option I missed. But every time I replay it, I come to the same conclusion. If I hadn't shot, you'd be dead. So I live with what I did, and I don't apologize for it. Does it get easier? No. But you get better at carrying it. They stood together as darkness fell. The monastery behind them was slowly being rebuilt. Volunteers from nearby villages had arrived offering labor. They worked without payment, just doing it because they believed in what Cedric represented. That faith was terrifying. It meant people were investing hope in him. Hope was fragile, easy to break, hard to repair. The reconstruction meetings began the following week. Cedric sat in council chambers with nobles who'd spent their lives maintaining the status quo. They argued about every proposal, fought against changes that threatened their privileges. It was exhausting, maddening, exactly what Cedric had expected. But slowly, incrementally, things shifted. A proposal to limit noble authority in judicial matters passed. Then one establishing independent oversight of estate management. Small victories. Barely noticeable individually. But collectively they added up to something larger. A system that recognized commoners as people rather than property. Lord Marcus Aldridge became Cedric's strongest ally. The young progressive noble threw his influence behind reforms others considered radical. Together they pushed through changes that made older nobles furious but couldn't be easily reversed. "You're building something that will outlast us," Marcus said one evening after a particularly brutal council session. "If it survives," Cedric replied, "it will. Because you've shown it's possible. That's the hardest part. Once people see an alternative exists, they can't unsee it. The old system is dead. It just doesn't know it yet." Cedric hoped he was right, but he'd learned not to trust hope. Hope was what you felt before reality crushed your assumptions. He'd put more faith in persistence, in showing up every day and pushing forward even when progress felt impossible. Evelyn visited 3 months after the battle. She looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been removed from her shoulders. She'd left court entirely, was traveling, seeing parts of the kingdom she'd only read about. "You look well," Cedric said. "I feel free," Evelyn replied. "Actually free, not the pretend freedom nobles claim while still following every social rule. Real freedom to choose my own path. Where are you going? Everywhere. Nowhere. Wherever seems interesting. I spent my whole life being what others needed. Now I'm discovering what I actually want. And what's that?" Evelyn smiled, still figuring it out. But the discovery is the point, not the destination. She stayed only briefly, long enough to sign the final annulment papers. The marriage that had never been real was now officially dissolved. Cedric felt nothing about it. No regret or relief, just acknowledgement that a chapter was closing. "Thank you," Cedric said as she was leaving, "for testifying, for defending me when you had every reason not to." "I didn't do it for you," Evelyn said. "I did it for me. Because watching you stand up to Victor made me realize I could stand up too. You didn't save me. You showed me I could save myself. There's a difference." She left. Cedric never saw her again. But he heard stories about a noble woman traveling alone, helping villages, learning trades, living a life completely divorced from aristocratic expectations. The stories made him smile. Evelyn had found what he was still searching for, a way to exist outside the boxes society built. Winter came. The monastery was nearly rebuilt, better than before, stronger. The villagers had done remarkable work. They'd created something that served the community, a place for travelers, for teaching, for gathering. It wasn't a church or a courthouse. It was something new, a commons where anyone could come and be heard. Rosalie ran it. She'd discovered a talent for organization, for bringing people together, for making space where everyone felt valued. Watching her work, Cedric realized she was building the thing he'd only theorized about, a system where power came from service rather than control. "You're better at this than I am," Cedric told her one evening. "I don't have a title to protect," Rosalie said. "That makes it easier. You're still trying to be a duke and a reformer. Those things contradict each other. So what do I do? Choose one." The answer was obvious, but Cedric had been avoiding it. The title was his identity, his family's legacy. Abandoning it felt like betraying everyone who'd carried the Blackthorn name, but maintaining it meant perpetuating the very system he was trying to dismantle. He spent weeks wrestling with the decision, argued with himself, sought counsel from Marcus and the Chancellor. Everyone had opinions. No one had answers. Finally, alone in the monastery late one night, Cedric made his choice. He would keep the title, but he would redefine what it meant. A duke didn't have to be a lord holding power over subjects. He could be a steward, someone who held authority temporarily on behalf of the people, who could be removed if he failed in that stewardship. That was revolutionary, dangerous, exactly what the kingdom needed. The proposal caused chaos in court. Nobles screamed about precedent, about tradition, about the destruction of everything their families had built. Cedric listened to their fury and felt nothing. These were the death throes of a dying system. They could rage all they wanted. History was moving forward without them. The vote was close, closer than Cedric expected, but it passed. Barely. The Blackthorn Duchy would become the first stewardship title. Cedric would serve a 10-year term. At the end, the people living on Blackthorn lands would vote on whether to retain him or choose someone else. It was unprecedented, terrifying, perfect. "You've just made yourself expendable," the Chancellor said after the vote. "I've made myself accountable," Cedric corrected. "There's a difference. Most nobles spend their lives trying to become untouchable. You've chosen the opposite. I'm not sure if that's brave or insane. Maybe both. Maybe that's what real change requires." Spring arrived. The monastery gardens bloomed. Rosalie had planted them with help from village children. They grew vegetables and herbs, things useful rather than decorative. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but subtlety was overrated. Cedric spent his days managing the duchy, resolving disputes, approving projects, learning how to govern as a servant rather than a master. It was harder than fighting, required more humility, more patience, more willingness to admit when he didn't know the answer. But slowly, the lands changed. Villages got cleaner water, roads improved. Disputes were settled fairly rather than favoring whoever had more gold. It wasn't paradise. Problems still existed, but they were being addressed instead of ignored. 1 year after the battle, Cedric stood in the monastery courtyard and addressed the gathered crowd. Families from every village, nobles who'd supported reform, even some who'd opposed it but showed up anyway out of curiosity. Hundreds of faces watching him. "A year ago," Cedric said, "I stood in court and confessed to adultery, to breaking laws and traditions. I expected to be destroyed for it. Instead, you gave me a chance to prove that honor isn't about following rules blindly. It's about choosing truth even when lies are easier." He paused. Let that settle. "This year has been hard. We've lost people we loved, buried friends and family, faced violence that never should have happened. I won't pretend their deaths were necessary or noble. They were tragic, consequences of a broken system that protected power over people." Some in the crowd nodded, others looked uncomfortable. Cedric continued, "But we didn't just mourn. We built. We changed laws that enabled corruption, created accountability where none existed, proved that different structures are possible. That's not victory. Victory would mean bringing back the dead. What we have is progress, incomplete, imperfect, but real." He looked across the crowd, saw the woman who'd lost her husband. She was watching him. Her expression was still hard, but she hadn't left. That meant something. "I promised some of you that change would happen, that your losses would mean something. I'm here to report on that promise. Not to say it's fulfilled, but to show you what we've started and invite you to help finish it." He outlined the reforms, the new judicial system, the land redistribution programs, the education initiatives. Every change fought for and won over the past year. The crowd listened, some with hope, some with skepticism. Both reactions were valid. "This isn't the end," Cedric said. "It's a beginning. Real change takes generations. I won't see it finished. Neither will you. But our children might. Their children definitely will. If we keep building, keep pushing, keep refusing to accept that the way things are is the way things must be." The crowd erupted, not in unified applause, in argument, debate, people shouting questions and challenges. It was messy, chaotic, democratic. Exactly what should happen when you gave people voice instead of demanding silence. Cedric stepped down from the platform. Let them argue. Leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating space where answers could emerge collectively. where the people most affected by decisions had say in making them. Rosalie found him afterward. You didn't mention yourself once in that speech. I'm not the story, Cedric said. You started it. I forced a conversation. The rest belongs to everyone. She kissed him. Right there in front of hundreds of people. No hiding, no pretense, just genuine affection between two people who'd survived hell together and come out different but intact. The crowd noticed. Some cheered. Others looked scandalized. Most just accepted it as normal. The Duke and the commoner who'd refused to hide their relationship even when hiding would have been safer. They'd become part of the landscape, a permanent feature people had learned to accommodate. That evening, Cedric and Rosalie walked through the forest, the same paths he'd ridden a year ago when everything was secret and desperate. Now they walked openly, no rushing, no fear, just two people enjoying the woods. Do you regret it? Rosalie asked. Any of it? Cedric thought about that, about everything lost and gained, the deaths, the pain, the permanent changes to who he was as a person. I regret the deaths, he said. Every single one. I regret not finding a way to avoid violence. I regret that people paid for my choices with their lives. But I don't regret standing up. Don't regret choosing truth. Don't regret loving you or fighting for something real. The consequences were terrible. The alternative would have been worse. Living dead, going through motions, pretending the cage was freedom. They reached a clearing. Moonlight filtered through trees. The same moonlight that had illuminated his desperate midnight rides. Back then it had felt oppressive, exposing. Now it just felt like light. I used to think courage meant not being afraid, Cedric said. Now I think it means being terrified and doing the thing anyway. Not because you're certain it will work, but because not doing it guarantees nothing changes. And has it changed? Rosalie asked. Really? Cedric looked back toward the monastery. Lights flickered in windows. People moving around inside, living, building, existing in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. Yes, he said. Not enough, not perfectly. But yes. The world is different than it was. That matters. They stood together in the clearing. Two people who'd become symbols without meaning to, who'd survived becoming symbols and found ways to remain human despite it. The forest around them was quiet, peaceful. The violence that had stained this ground was fading into memory. Soon it would fade into history, eventually into myth. But the changes would remain. The laws passed, the precedents set, the proof that standing up to corruption didn't automatically mean destruction. Those things were permanent. They'd outlast everyone involved in creating them. That was legacy, not monuments or titles, changes that improved lives for people who'd never know the names of those who fought for them. Cedric had entered this wanting to escape a loveless marriage. He was ending it having helped reshape how power worked. The gap between those two things was vast, unexpected, entirely accidental. But accidental didn't mean meaningless. Sometimes the most important changes came from people just trying to survive who stumbled into revolution, who chose authenticity because lying was killing them and accidentally created permission for others to be authentic too. Cedric took Rosalie's hand. Her fingers were warm, real, proof that some things survived when everything else burned. They walked back toward the monastery together, not hiding, not rushing, just two people who'd learned that the only way to live was honestly, even when honesty carried consequences too heavy to imagine. Behind them, the forest whispered. Wind through trees that had witnessed generations of secrets. The Blackthorn Duchy had been built on those secrets, on hidden truths and carefully maintained lies. That foundation was crumbling now, being replaced by something more fragile but more honest. The work would continue. Tomorrow Cedric would wake and return to council meetings, to disputes and decisions and the endless grinding effort of changing systems designed to resist change. It would be frustrating, exhausting, worth it, because the alternative was returning to the life he'd fled. The cold marriage, the performance, the slow death of living as a construct rather than a person. He'd tasted freedom, however temporary, however hard-won. Going back wasn't possible. The only direction was forward, and forward meant walking through the forest with the woman he loved, toward a monastery they defended with blood. Meant waking each day and choosing to build instead of maintain. Meant accepting that he'd never see the finished product, but building anyway because the work itself was the point. The monastery appeared through the trees, restored, repurposed, alive with people and purpose. Cedric looked at it and felt something he'd forgotten was possible. Pride. Not in title or bloodline, in actual accomplishment, in having created something that served others instead of himself. They entered through the main doors. People greeted them. Casual, familiar, like they belonged here. Because they did, not as Duke and Commoner, as Cedric and Rosalie, two people who'd fought for the right to exist authentically and won that right through blood and stubbornness and refusing to accept that love was weakness. That night, lying beside Rosalie in the room where this had all begun, Cedric thought about Victor, about the man who'd tried to destroy him and ended up catalyzing everything that came after. Victor had been right about one thing. The system was corrupt. Where he'd been wrong was believing corruption was inevitable, that ruthlessness always won. Ruthlessness won battles, but it lost wars, because systems built on fear eventually collapsed under their own weight. What endured was connection, community, the messy, complicated business of people choosing to build together instead of tearing each other down. That was the real victory, not defeating Victor, not surviving the battle, creating something that would outlast them all. A different way of existing where power served people instead of enslaving them, where titles were responsibilities rather than privileges, where being human wasn't a liability. Cedric closed his eyes. His body still ached from wounds that would never fully heal. His mind carried scars from decisions that would haunt him forever. But he was alive, free, building something real. That was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Outside, the kingdom slept, unaware that the old order was dying, that the future was being built in a monastery by people who'd refused to accept that suffering was inevitable, who'd chosen to fight even when fighting seemed hopeless. History would remember this moment, or it wouldn't. Either way, the work would continue. Seeds planted by dead men and women would grow into forests their children would walk through. Cedric's name might fade, but the changes would remain. That was legacy. Not fame or glory. Knowing you'd made the world slightly less brutal for people you'd never meet, that your suffering had purchased something real instead of just feeding the machine that created it. Cedric Blackthorne fell asleep beside Rosalie Vale in a monastery that had witnessed the death of the old world and the birth of something new. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new reasons to doubt whether any of this mattered. But tonight, in this moment, he was simply a man who'd chosen love over duty and survived the consequences. Who'd learned that the cage was always unlocked, that freedom meant accepting responsibility instead of hiding behind tradition. The story wasn't finished. Stories like this never finished. They just continued in different forms with different people facing similar choices, whether to hide or stand, to perform or live authentically, to accept suffering or fight to reduce it. Cedric had made his choice. The kingdom would spend decades processing the consequences. But the choice itself was made, permanent, irreversible. And in that permanence, finally, was peace.